Fire, not the kind that warms, but the kind that destroys, that roared through South African townships in 2008, 2015, and again in 2019. This was not a natural fire. It was a fire fueled by fear, poverty, and misplaced hatred. A fire that turned neighbor against neighbor, African against African. In the early 1990s, the air in South Africa was thick with hope. The long and painful struggle against apartheid had finally ended. After decades of racial oppression, segregation, and state-sanctioned violence, the country stood at the edge of transformation. The world watched in awe as Black South Africans cast their votes for the first time in 1994. Nelson Mandela, a man who had spent 27 years in prison, became the president of a free nation. It was one of the most iconic moments in African history. For many, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinary, a second chance, not just for South Africa, but for the African continent. It was the belief that a new Africa was possible, an Africa that could rise from the ruins of colonization, division, and exploitation. A rainbow nation, they called it, a term filled with pride and promise. But beneath the surface of celebration and symbolism, the roots of inequality were still very much alive. The brutal legacy of apartheid had left deep scars, scars that would take far more than a new government to heal. The economy, land ownership, housing, healthcare, and education systems were still tilted in favor of the minority. Black South Africans remained in the margins, still poor, still jobless, still angry. Democracy had come, but freedom still felt out of reach for many. As years passed, the weight of those unfulfilled promises began to crush the hopes that had once lit up the country. Communities in the townships and informal settlements waited for jobs, for houses, for dignity, but the wait was long and progress was slow. Into this fragile space came waves of migrants, not from Europe or America, but from across the African continent. They came from Zimbabwe, fleeing economic collapse and political repression. They came from Nigeria, chasing business opportunities, from Somalia and Ethiopia, escaping conflict and hunger, from Malawi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Mozambique, each with their own reasons, each carrying a heavy story. They arrived in buses, trucks, and on foot. They settled in the very same places the locals lived, the crowded townships, the underdeveloped cities, the forgotten corners of society. They opened small businesses, selling food, braiding hair, repairing electronics. Many were skilled but took low-paying jobs. Others became informal traders, hawking goods on the streets. At first, their presence was tolerated, but over time, as unemployment continued to rise and basic services remained undelivered, resentment grew. Slowly, and then all at once, frustration turned into suspicion, and suspicion turned into blame. They're taking our jobs. They're driving up crime. They're here illegally. They don't belong here. These were the whispers that became chants, and those chants turned into flames. In May 2008, the country was rocked by some of the worst xenophobic violence in its history. In townships across Johannesburg and beyond, mobs descended on the homes and businesses of foreign nationals. People were dragged from their shacks and beaten. Shops were looted and set on fire. In some of the most horrific scenes, men were necklaced, burned alive with tires around their necks simply for being from the wrong country. By the time the violence subsided, 62 people were dead, more than 100,000 were displaced, and the dream of Pan-African unity was deeply wounded. What was most heartbreaking was the nature of the violence. It was not organized war, it was neighbor against neighbor. People who had once borrowed sugar from each other or greeted at the corner shop were now turning on one another with machetes and petrol bombs. And yet, the story did not end in 2008. In 2015, it happened again. In 2019, the streets of Johannesburg and Durban erupted in violence once more. Foreign nationals, often Africans, were hunted in the streets. Videos spread across social media like wildfire, showing men being beaten, shops torched, and bodies lifeless on the ground. Why does this keep happening? The easy answer The one some politicians like to repeat is that foreigners are taking what little South Africans have. But the truth is far more complex and far more uncomfortable. South Africa is a country in pain. It is a nation still fighting the ghosts of its past. The promises of the new South Africa, equality, opportunity, prosperity, have not reached the majority. The wounds of apartheid remain open, and in the absence of healing, anger needs somewhere to go. And too often, that anger is directed at immigrants. But immigrants are not the problem. The problem is poverty, the problem is inequality, the problem is corruption, the problem is a system that has failed its people. Foreign nationals are simply the most visible targets. They are small business owners who operate in neighborhoods where big corporations won't invest. They are street vendors selling tomatoes and secondhand clothes. They are hairdressers, mechanics, security guards, and cleaners. They work in informal spaces because they are locked out of the formal economy. And because of their desperation, they often accept lower wages, further fueling the myth that they are stealing jobs. But how many South Africans truly want to wake up at 4 a.m. to push a cart through the city, selling boiled eggs or pirated CDs in the sun? How many want to risk their lives smuggling goods across borders or working for cents in dangerous construction zones? The truth is, immigrants are not taking anything that was ever truly offered. They are simply surviving in the cracks of a broken system. It is also important to understand the human side of this story. Behind every immigrant shopkeeper is a mother back home praying for his safety. Behind every street vendor is a child who dreams of going to school, even if the fees are too high. Behind every kwede, the derogatory term used for foreigners, is a human being who fled war, hunger, or political persecution, hoping to build a life in a country that once inspired the world. These people are not invaders. They are survivors. And the cruelty they face is not just physical violence. It is humiliation. It is being called names on the street. It is being denied medical care. It is watching your hard-earned store burn to the ground while the police stand by and do nothing. It is being told again and again that you do not belong. This hatred is especially painful because it is African against African. We shared the same ancestors. We bear the same scars of colonization and slavery. We speak related languages, eat similar food, worship similar gods. We are brothers and sisters divided by imaginary lines drawn by European empires, borders that mean nothing to the spirit of Ubuntu, the African philosophy of shared humanity. So how did we get here? How did the children of struggle become agents of hate? Part of the answer lies in leadership. Too many South African politicians, instead of confronting the failures of governance, choose to scapegoat. It is easier to say it's the foreigners than admit the government has failed to create jobs, housing, or reform education. But scapegoating never solves the problem. It only deepens the wounds. Another part of the answer lies in the media. Often when crimes occur, headlines scream Nigerian drug dealer caught or Zimbabwean gang arrested. But when a crime is committed by a local, there is no mention of nationality. The narrative becomes lopsided. Foreigners are portrayed as criminals while their contributions are ignored. What the media rarely shows is the Somali shopkeeper who gave free food during lockdown, or the Congolese teacher who tutors neighborhood kids, or the Malawian gardener who sends money home every month to pay for his sister's schooling. It is time to shift the narrative. Xenophobia is not just an African problem, it is a global one. But for South Africa, it is especially tragic because the country knows what it means to be hated. South Africans have known what it means to be locked out of society, to be told they are less than human. The memory of apartheid is not so distant. And yet here we are, repeating the cycle of exclusion and fear. But there is hope. Across the country, there are people fighting back, not with violence, but with compassion. Community leaders, churches, activists, and ordinary citizens are building bridges. They are holding dialogues, protecting their foreign neighbors, advocating for fair policies. There are youth who reject the poison of hate. They see their fellow Africans not as enemies, but as fellow travelers in the same journey of survival. There are teachers who remind their students that before colonization, we were all one people, that Africa is not a collection of enemies, but a family separated by flags and fences. And there are artists, musicians, poets, and filmmakers who are using their voices to tell a new story, one of unity, of shared struggle, of love. South Africa has a choice to make. It can continue to allow fear and anger to divide it, or it can rise again, not just as the Rainbow Nation, but as the beating heart of a united Africa. The future is not written in stone. It is shaped by the choices we make every day. Let South Africa be the place where hatred ends and healing begins. Let it be a nation where no one is killed for where they were born. Let it be a country where the dream of 1994 is finally fulfilled, not just for South Africans, but for every African who dares to dream.